Okay, take two, and welcome to another episode of Mr. K is Wrong. And this is a show where I debunk the Facebook memes posted by a right winger that I used to know in my high school days, and I call him Mr. K. So this time I'm going to debunk a right wing meme from the Facebook group called Shove Your COVID Biologics and mRNA Vaccines Up Your Ass. Ooh, what a tangy title to that group, huh? So anyway, the meme says Obama made Americans buy health insurance or you paid a fine. Biden made you take a shot or you lost your job. Tell me again how Trump is a fascist dictator? It ends with a couple of question marks there. So okay, I'm gonna tell you exactly the difference here. So first, the meme is lying by taking very different things and putting them into the same box. For starters, Obama and health insurance is, different from fascism. So let me explain why. The Affordable Care Act did not actually enact fascism. It did not, you know, put a Gestapo on the streets or something like that. The Affordable Care Act did include an individual mandate, but you were not forced to buy insurance because if you chose not to, the penalty was a tax, later reduced to $0 because the tax was stricken down. No one lost a job, was arrested, or was barred from public life. The law went through Congress, courts, and elections. That's normal democratic governance. You can oppose it, but it wasn't particularly authoritarian. All right? So, what about another aspect of it, the Biden and COVID vaccines part of the meme? So Biden did not make everyone take a shot or lose your job. There was no universal vaccine mandate. Federal employees and some contractors were required to vaccinate or seek exemptions. OSHA proposed a rule allowing vaccination or regular testing, but the Supreme Court blocked it. Private employers made their own policies as they're always able to do. Well, unless those policies end up violating civil rights, in which case, historically, they've sometimes been punished if they have been found to violate rights. Not always the case, but on a few, case by case examples, you could find something like that. So again, this happened through legal processes with courts stopping parts of it. That's the opposite of dictatorship. Now compare that to Trump. This is where the meme collapses. Fascism isn't about whether a policy annoys you or inconveniences you. It's about power and behavior. Trump repeatedly has shown classic authoritarian traits. He's attacked the legitimacy of elections before and after losing them. He demands personal loyalty from law enforcement, from judges, and military leaders. He's called the press the enemy of the people, a phrase that's straight out of 20th century dictatorships. He's praised and envied strongmen who rule without democratic limits. And of course, he's trying to act like one of those right now. There's been threats and expansionist rhetoric as well, which is more fascistic than just, taxing a tax penalty. Trump openly talks about taking Greenland from Denmark, which is a NATO ally. This isn't noble policy, it is imperial style bluster, treating other countries as assets to be seized. Democratic leaders don't talk like that. You also have ICE and authoritarian policing, which is really taking off. Comparing Trump's ICE to the Gestapo isn't saying they are absolutely identical in every conceivable way. It's a comparison of methods and mentality. You have masked agents detaining people without clear identification, raids designed to terrorize communities, not just enforce the law, and certainly not to create an atmosphere of public safety and, you know, a comfortable scene. It's not just a bunch of police there keeping everybody safe, getting the neighborhood cat out of a tree, that kind of stuff. It's not the image that they even want to promote. They want to make people afraid. You have deliberate family separation used as a deterrent. In the past, of course, there might be some circumstances where authorities were acting in a tyrannical manner. And what do you know? That's exactly what Trump is emphasizing the most in his policies. And you also have leadership that frames migrants as vermin and invaders, which is overtly Hitler-esque rhetoric. I mean, there's just no way around that at this point. So you could try to tell me otherwise till you're blue in the face, but the parallels are clear as day. And that kind of policing aimed at fear and submission rather than due process is exactly why people draw historical parallels. You don't need gas chambers for a comparison to be valid, though plenty of ICE agents would put people to death if given a chance. That is also very clear by this point, and it's also why a lot of people are saying that ICE needs to be abolished. And I would say that in addition to that, you should have some strict penalties and limits uh, to presidential power. If a president commits a crime, or if somebody in high office, like whatever title they have, well, they should be punished for it more than if a regular citizen committed a similar crime, because really that's where legitimacy would come from. The leader, if he or she is legitimate, they will actually have a more, I guess, law abiding nature. They will do more, genuinely benevolent things. That's exactly why you should have a leader in the first place, because they set a good example. And if they're not doing that, well, then maybe you don't even need a leader in the first place. All right? Because one of the key points of having any sort of authority figure is that they set good examples for other people to follow. If they don't do that, then you know what? Maybe we don't need them. Maybe we don't need them. And in order for fascism and authoritarianism to thrive, you need state power used to intimidate and dehumanize. And that's what Trump and ICE have done. So the bottom line here is that the meme pretends that fascism means the government did something I didn't like. Well, that's not what the word fascism means. Fascism is undermining elections, right? That's one of the key components historically. Demonizing minorities. Boom, that's MAGA, you know, perfectly explained right there. That's one of their key highlights, is the constant demonizing of minorities. And you might say, oh, they focus on immigrants more than any other group. And okay, maybe that's true, but they will transpose that hatred over to any other group at any given moment. It's just that the so-called illegal immigrant is the easiest group to scapegoat. And interestingly enough, they're taking things so far in the extreme direction that if you look at the polling now, they've actually made uh, people feel more positively about immigration than they were in the recent past. So, in some ways, Trump's sort of uh, demonic obsession with immigrants has backfired. Now, I don't know how reliable that polling is. Of course, a lot of people will still endlessly bash immigrants. You'll probably find some uncle in your family who's like that, or maybe another family member or a coworker or whatever. But overall, people are seeing the lies exposed that are so often used against immigrants. Like, well, one example I'll give here, I'll try to be quick about this, but remember the constant talk about immigrants stealing jobs. Well, what's one of the problems that we had, since the COVID era? Well, a lot of jobs were left vacant. Now, if these businesses were all struggling to fill those positions and it was actually making mainstream headlines, what does that mean about the idea that immigrants are all flooding in to just steal all these jobs? It means it's a lie. It's a vicious lie in many ways. And if you think about it, like these right wingers often contradict themselves anyway, because on the one hand, they'll claim that immigrants are taking all the jobs, right? But then they'll turn right around and somehow say that all these immigrants are lazy and they're welfare cheats and stuff like that. you know, you kind of can't have both of those extremes at the same level, you know? Like you can't say that they're taking every job under the sun, but at the same time claiming that they're basically all lazy and welfare cheats or whatever. And of course, these are all lies, just like the lies about Haitian immigrants eating dogs or whatever. They'll they'll take a stereotype that was originally for a different group and just transpose it onto another group that they don't like because I mean, it's awkward and uncomfortable to say this, but the stereotype about eating dogs was originally about people from Asian countries, right? But then they just forgot about that and said, well, actually, it can be Haitians too. Haitians do that. So, yeah, it's a disgusting worldview that MAGA has permeated across the United States. And of course, these prejudices did exist before MAGA, but people like Trump just came along and capitalized on them in a really massive way. Anyway, you also have another hallmark of fascism is the weaponization of law enforcement. Obviously, that's happening under ICE. No real debate on that point. Uh, how about glorifying one leader over institutions? Well, that's certainly happening. And treating dissent as treason. Well, that's something Republicans are masters at. For basically my entire life, they've treated you as treasonous if you disagree with a Republican president. But if you disagree with a Democrat, well, that's not treason. It's funny because during the Iraq War era, I was accused of supporting Saddam Hussein or supporting Al Qaeda or anything like any number of stupid things like that. If you criticize war, it means you support Saddam Hussein. It's it was just ludicrous, and that was, of course, a way of trying to demonize dissent or stop criticism, basically stop any sort of critical analysis of the war, because back then George W. Bush was the top dog and you were supposed to sort of bow to him and just absolve him of any responsibility to tell the truth or abide by basic moral standards. He was sort of like the proto Trump in some ways. I guess you could say that about other presidents too, like Richard Nixon, of course, but in many ways, George W. Bush was sort of like the proto Trump. Um, he was also very stupid too. I know Penn Jillette has gone on record saying actually George W. Bush was smart because he was the president, yada yada. But I have to disagree with Penn Jillette on that point because he didn't get to be president because he was smart. George W. Bush became president because he was the son of a former president who was himself, a former vice president. And of course, he was in the CIA. So, of course, W had a good chance of ascending into political office. And, you know, the whole idea that we live in a meritocracy. That's a false premise, if ever there was one. Anyway, Obama and Biden operated within democratic limits, were checked by courts, and they left office peacefully. Trump tried to break those limits, praised dictators, well, he still praises dictators, threatens allies, and he's attempted to overturn an election and will surely do that again. And that's in a, you know, a general background where Republicans are already doing a lot of redistricting hijinks and trying to throw out votes. They do voter roll purges and all that kind of stuff. So they were already on track to, try to rig the election. You have Ken Paxton in Texas, who very powerful figure in their political system. But he went on record. I don't remember which podcast it was, but you can definitely find the YouTube video of it. But he said that if they didn't purge votes in Texas, Biden would have actually won the state. So keep that in mind. That was actually a significant confession, and you should try to find that clip. I don't really do a clip show here. I don't like play other clips. So I'll leave that one up to you. Anyway, all of these reasons I've explained are why people call Trump a fascist. It's not because of vaccines. In fact, Trump wanted to take credit for the COVID vaccine. Remember that? Well, apparently a lot of Republicans have amnesia for when it comes to that because, if they recalled that actually Trump wasn't strictly anti-vaccine, well, then that kind of complicates their narrative a little bit because, it somehow got to the point where they want to rewrite history and pretend that the COVID vaccine had nothing to do with Trump. Which is kind of funny because Trump was literally trying to take credit for that, you know. And ironically, I'm giving him a little bit of credit for that, for not standing in the way of the development of those vaccines. So, oddly enough, the thing that Trump actually deserves some positive credit for is exactly what what his own MAGA movement is trying to take the credit away from him for. They try to pretend he had nothing to do with it or whatever, when in fact he actually had at least something to do with it. He had some involvement in that. So, even when actually does something kind of good, kind of right, and he doesn't get in the way, well, that's the one thing that they would criticize, him for actually doing. And so it's just a little bit ironic. So anyway, the accusation that he's a fascist is not because of his views on taxes or anything like that. People call him fascist mostly because of how he treats power itself and people, and the fact that he wants to make literally everything about himself. No other branches of government matter to him. He wants no checks and balances. He just wants power for himself, just like a fascist dictator.